Could you please just say and spell your name?
Bonnie Fox, Bonniefox.
Great. Now, it is the spring of 2013. The last time you and I spoke on tape was late 2009. The healthcare battle was heating up. It was the first 9 months or so of the Obama administration, the first administration. And your life circumstances, as with the city and the country at large, were difficult. So why don't you kind of summarize where you were at that point in 2009 and maybe narrate the years in between, and then we can talk in more detail about some of what you've seen and what you've thought.
Okay. Well, in 2009, as we both know, my life, like the lives of many people in this country, had taken a very, very radical and very unsettling turn. And because I wasn't working, and at that point I was collecting unemployment insurance, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to get not only a full-time job, but even a part-time job. And I was mostly full of panic and worry and stress and tension. And people stepped up and helped me out for a while, but I knew that wasn't a really good solution for my financial worries and so on. So I just kept plugging along, and as I said, with help from some people so I could keep my apartment, I just kept plugging along. And then in late 2010, I decided to cash in my pension. I had a pension from Weill Cornell Medical Center. I'd worked there many years. And so in early 2011, just before I turned 62, I cashed in my pension, I paid off my debt, and I managed to get a little part-time job doing fundraising, etc., for a company that did that for Carnegie Hall. And so at that time, that was, in a way, although it doesn't sound like a whole heck of a lot, but it was a turning point. And I also started to collect my Social Security at 62. And I guess the combination of just very practical things like paying off my debt, starting to collect Social Security, getting a little part-time job, even though things weren't perfect, obviously, or ideal, it seemed to be a turning point for me. So that was about 2 years ago, early 2011. And from that point forward, other things started to happen for me. And as of the last year or so, I got both one really fun part-time job that I enjoy very much that pays decently, and then followed on the heels of that, I got a second part-time job. So the two part-time jobs are actually satisfying, not exactly the ideal anything, but certainly very satisfying, and my life is turning around now. And I also let go of some very heavy-duty responsibilities that I had both at the temple that I was a part of for many, many years, and also some familial responsibilities that other people are now picking up the slack on. So I'm freer, as it were.
So altogether, you were unemployed for how long?
I was actually unemployed, I would say, for roughly 2 years, something like, well, not exactly 2 years. I mean, well, it might have been about 2 years, yeah, because in 2010, I got a couple of temporary gigs, like I worked for the census, which was really fun and really interesting, and it was fascinating to go into buildings and knock on people's doors. These were the people who hadn't filled out their census, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I did that, and there was another part-time job that I had doing subscriptions for Carnegie Hall, different company. So that was a lot of fun, and I met a lot of people, and I certainly made some new friends at some of these part-time gigs. And I think it would amaze people, or perhaps not, to know how many people with advanced degrees are working in part-time telemarketing jobs and all kinds of part-time jobs because they can't get work in their chosen field. When I was still working doing fundraising at Carnegie, I made friends and know people who have PhDs, MBAs, people who are artists, people who are musicians, and we were all kind of together trying to make ends meet.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite an experience.
Yeah, I imagine. And is that I imagine there's a kind of camaraderie that develops in that setting.
Yeah.
Are you still in touch with some of those folks?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, I made some good friends there, a couple of whom are retired, but were working there part-time to sort of supplement their retirement, and a couple who were younger, who were very creative. One person there actually worked in the fashion industry doing design and display. Another person is an actress and a singer, very interesting woman, an American but lived for over 10 years in Germany, got married there, performed there, then got a divorce, came back to the States. So yes, I've made some friends, and we have a bond that I kind of think it's like when people are in particular situations, they bond in a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like people I know, my cousins and my uncle were all military people, and there's a military thing that kind of brings people together. And in this case, these are people who, but for the economic circumstances of the time, would probably all still have been working in their chosen fields, and we probably never would have met because they were in artistic fields or academic areas or whatever. We probably wouldn't have bumped up against each other, but we did, and then we became friends because we were all going through a very similar kind of experience, and we had a lot of dark humor.
Yeah.
A lot of dark humor there.
Well, it's interesting because when we spoke in 2009, I remember really vividly one of the things that you talked about was the loneliness of being unemployed in 2009, and the way that all of the applications for aid, applications for work, everything was basically you and your computer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting that once you found the community out there of like individuals, who are going through similar circumstances, that there is this real bond.
There is a bond, and we also all try to, boost each other's morale, be there for each other. If somebody had a disappointing interview or didn't get a call back on a job, we would always try to somehow encourage the person and say, oh, it's just one interview, don't worry about it, a better one will come along next week. So we had that sense of each other. We were and are very aware of each other's feelings. It's not that kind of casual thing where you could care less, like you walk out of some place and you don't care. You care. You care about the people. And even those of us who have gone on to get better jobs and have a better life, we still care about the other folks. And often we'll keep in touch. If there's a friendship that's been made, we'll keep in touch and say, let's call so-and-so and ask them to come and have brunch with us or something like that. So there's a lot of caring there, a lot of caring and a lot of concern. And I think the only people, I've been at dinners with very, very close friends of mine where it's a whole group of close friends and we've all known each other for many, many years. And they'll start talking about things that, interestingly enough, or maybe not so interestingly enough, I cannot relate to at all. We're all basically the same age, but their lives are very different. They've not experienced a long spate of unemployment. So their concerns are different. So they keep talking about their investments and their retirement monies and, buying a house someplace up in the country and stuff, none of which I can relate to. So mostly I just sort of sit there and go, that sounds good. Oh, where are you thinking of buying? But I can't really relate to that because the people who I really can relate to in that particular way, I'm not saying my friends aren't still my friends. Of course I love my friends. But the people who I've been through the sort of that Carnegie experience with, and the people who have somehow struggled and come out at some point on the other side of that struggle, are the people who I can sit with and say, oh my God, can you imagine? Or people will say to me, I feel so ashamed because I still have to ask my mother, my father, my aunt, my brother for help in paying my rent or paying my other bills. And when I hear things like that, I know, because my aunt and my friends believe me when there was no Social Security yet and no, none of that stuff. I know what that's like, and I know that it's very you feel diminished somehow when you
Yeah.
have to go to somebody, even somebody who loves you and gives to you freely. There, no strings attached. I'm giving you this money so you can stay in your home, so you can stay in New York. If it hadn't been for that, I would have, I don't know what, I would have had to go and live with somebody, probably a family member, and move out of New York and make significant changes to my life. So I was very lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones. There aren't that many people out there who are lucky as...
I wanted to talk to you about your sense, kind of stepping back and thinking historically, thinking nationally about the recovery, or the so-called recovery. Right? What is your sense of these years that we've been through? And your fortunes are up, and statistically that is kind of true. I mean, there are more people now whose fortunes are rising than back in 2009. But what is your sense of where we are as a nation, and how the recovery is going or has gone?
Well, I honestly think that the middle class as we knew it and were part of it, those of us who were part of whatever they call that middle class, that solid middle class, I honestly think that will not really come back again. I think that, yes, things are better for me and for many people, but better, more... they're not necessarily better in the finer tuned, sort of qualitative way. I'm working 2 part-time jobs. Many people I know are working part-time jobs. We have no benefits. We don't have health insurance. We don't have vacation time. If we take time off work, we just lose the pay. So it's good that it's happened and we're moving in a better direction, but I don't think it's going to be what it once was. I think the competition out there is enormous. I think that global economy means that. I think that everything that happens here affects everything that happens there, and everything that happens there, wherever there is, affects us. So it's not going to be, nobody's living on an island unto themselves, which I don't think anybody has for a long time. And so is it better? Yes. Is it where we really could be as a country, given the talent that we have in this country and the education of many of the people who I have bumped up against? No, we're not anywhere near that. When you have people with PhDs working for minimum wage, you're not where you need to be. Absolutely not.
What you're describing is a kind of, it sounds almost like a double consciousness, where on the one hand you're supremely aware of the broad structural circumstances and how massive the problems are, and how structured they are. It's about globalization. It's about this moment in the history of capital. It's like there are all kinds of structural, it's that you can understand how it is that you would be unemployed or underemployed, and how there are millions of people out there in that boat. And then on the other hand, 5 minutes ago, you're speaking about it as this intensely personal, kind of shamed existence. So can you talk a little bit about those 2 levels of awareness and what your experience of that has been?
That's such a multi-layered kind of a question. I think it's because, I think part of it is because I come from such an intensely political family, and my nurturing was so political, and you could never separate the political and the economic from the personal. It all has always sort of been lumped together. And so that's why on one level I can be very, very detached and just talk about, regurgitate what I read in The Economist or The Times or something like that. And at the same time, on a very personal level, at times it has taken every bit of strength that I can conjure up to tell myself that it's going to be okay, that not even it, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to get out of this. But it's very, very hard. It's like I literally for years had to give myself, every day I had to get up and give myself goals, tasks, organize my day, do all of those things before I'd let myself, when I wasn't working, I'd say, okay, you can go to the library and get a book out and do this later in the day, but right now You have to go online and you have to look at job ads and you have to do this and you have to call the agencies. So, and I think I've also personally paid a certain price in that if I had been following the track that I probably should have followed and gone to graduate school and had a career and done all the things that people are supposed to do if you come from a certain background and whatever, my life might have been different. I still might have lost a job, but my options might have been different. I would have been a different person, but I've never had a career. So then at a certain point when I wasn't working, of course I started to blame myself for not being the way I was, quote unquote, supposed to be. That I hadn't taken the path or the track that many people of my age and my generation and growing up in New Rochelle and doing this and doing that, those people all had career tracks. A lot of the women did too, because that's when everything changed. So women went to college not necessarily to just get married or something, but they went to college so they could become teachers or psychologists or social workers or whatever. And I had never done any of those things. I had taken myself out of that path voluntarily. God alone knows why. I don't know why I did that. I thought I was going to be whoever I thought I was going to be, a poet or some kind of creative person. So I removed myself from a lot of that and then got to a point in my life and said, oh, Knucklehead Smith, why did you do this? So your question about the personal part of it, yeah, I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. I was devastated several ways. I was devastated partly because I realized that I had brought this on myself, that if I had gone and gotten a master's degree or a PhD and become a teacher or done this or done that, then I would have perhaps had other paths that I could have pursued. But I limited myself by not doing those things, by telling myself, oh, I'm going to be a maverick and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and ended up never having a career, never having a profession. And then on top of everything else, I felt like a total loser because I couldn't even get work in the field that I had spent at that time, I don't know, 20, maybe 25 years in or something or more. And I couldn't get work in that area. Even a part-time job at that point was beyond what I could. And so then the personal became, partly it was the them situation, like look at what they've done to me, because you get very sort of defensive about things. And the other part of it was, look what I've done to me. Look what I've done, because I'm an idiot. I should have done certain things. I should have pursued certain areas. When I went back to school to get my bachelor's degree, I had professors who were literally not begging me, but saying, Bonnie, you've got to go to graduate school. You've got to go to law school. You've got to do something because you've got all this, you've got this energy and you've got this wonderfully inquiring mind. Go to graduate school. As soon as you're out of here, go to graduate school. I'll recommend you. We'll recommend you. Get yourself into a good graduate program someplace. Didn't do that. Just, I don't know why, some kind of weird willfulness, inverted willfulness. I don't know what to call it anymore. So when all of this really horrible stuff was going on, first I was beating up everybody, sort of invisibly in big business who had caused this, in the government who had caused this, all these people. And then I started beating up on myself and saying, but you could have done something. Why didn't you do something? So it took me a while to sort of get out of that,
Yeah. Well, it's a trap, right?
It is a trap. Because once you start going down that cycle, and believe me, I've heard other people, even the people I know who did have professions and careers and so on, they beat themselves up too. Because after a while, you can't separate the impersonal from the personal. You lose that ability. If you're out of work for too long, or you're struggling for too long, or you have family and friends literally keeping you from going out on the street, it changes you. It just changes you, and you have a whole different perspective. But you have to get over that whole thing of, blaming yourself and thinking there's something wrong with you and, oh, I'm such a loser, everybody around me. And especially if you have friends who, God bless them, but they're at a totally different point in their lives, and they're sitting down with financial planners talking about their retirement and what they're going to do and where they're going to live and if they're going to have a place in the country to go to or travel all the time or what have you. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, what did I do wrong? And of course, living my life backwards, being in a relationship for 15 years and then ending that relationship and then not even having a partner to share any of this angst and anguish with. So I thought, well, body, you did not plan wisely. This is not a good thing to be happening. So, but it's very complicated. It's very complicated because people who grow up a certain way don't want to feel like they're in jeopardy of losing their homes. They're in jeopardy of being out on the street. I mean, this is the kind of thing that, this happens to somebody else, it's not going to happen to me. I grew up in New Rochelle. People like me don't have this happen to them. Mm-hmm. And I've heard this from many people. One of the people I worked with at Carnegie grew up in Long Island and had a very good life and was very well educated and very creative, and then also ended up there. And we used to talk about things like that all the time. Like, what happened? What happened?
Yeah. So now, stepping back yet again, kind of looking more broadly, I remember even though things were so dark in 2009 when we spoke, there was a kind of hopefulness. It was the beginning of the Obama administration. I know that you took a lot of hope from the election of 2008. How does that seem now? I mean, what's your sense of the job that Obama has done? What's your sense of our politics and our ability to address the problems that we have as a country? How are you feeling about our society at this historical moment?
Well, I think I'm feeling better about the American people than I am about the federal government. And I don't think I'm alone in that either. I have very little trust or faith in the people who are actually representing us in government. And even though being a Democrat, I'm obviously glad that Obama won a second term, and that some of the Democrats in Congress seem to be good people. But because of this total gridlock, was such a convenient word, but the fact that there doesn't seem to be any real dialogue, there's no conversation, there's no opening of roads between the two parties, there's no real cooperation, and it's very frightening, because what the American people seem to want, pretty much, other than people really on the fringes both ways, but most of the American people want some kind of cooperation so we can move forward. And I think that's what we all believed back in 2009. As terrible as everything was, it was the dawn of a new time. And because we had, for the first time in our history, an African-American president, and because that president seemed to represent a much wider diversity of people, the umbrella was much larger, the tent was much larger, and that was very exciting for a lot of people. And it still is very exciting. I mean, the fact that we had a president who said in his second, inaugural address, when he linked, Seneca Falls to Selma to Stonewall, that is an amazing, right there, that's a definitive moment in terms of inclusiveness, in terms of broadening all of that to include women's movement, civil rights, gay rights, all of that stuff was encompassed in that one phrase. And I tell you that not only did I weep, as along with millions of people, but when I spoke to my sister that night, the two of us were just absolutely talking about that through the whole conversation. Excuse me. So, I mean, that sort of thing is so exciting and so gratifying because for a long time, I don't think I ever expected some of the actual civil rights progress that we've made over the last let's say 40 to 50 years in this country, I don't think I ever expected any of that to happen. I really didn't. Because when I was coming of age, Mickey Schwerner grew up in New Rochelle. His mother taught biology at New Rochelle High School. I remember going back to school that September, and I remember the way New Rochelle High School was. The whole school was in mourning for what happened to him and Andy Goodman and James Chaney down in Mississippi. I remember collecting food and other things to send down to Mississippi. We had this whole thing going on at New Rochelle High School called the Mississippi Project, Freedom Project, and we sent all kinds of things down there for Thanksgiving that year. So I remember all of that, but I also remember the fear and the dread and the fact that we never knew what was going to happen. I mean, the impact of the civil rights movement was something that, again, I don't think people ever really anticipated, that we could actually get someplace where we have an African-American president, where we have same-sex marriage legalized in so many states and about to probably be legalized in other, and of course the whole case, the 2 cases before the Supreme Court. So all of that is remarkable for that to have happened in a very short space of time. But at the same time, we still have a new age of robber barons, and look at what they're doing, not just here, but they have at it all over the planet, and there is absolutely no control over what's going on there. I mean, it's like I've almost reached a point where I don't even think about it anymore because it's so far removed from me. It's like another world. It's like a world within a world. And those people, those quote-unquote 1%ers, have nothing to do with anybody. It's not just in this country, it's wherever they are. They're not, I mean, I can't even relate to that kind of money. I can't even envision or encompass being a multi-billionaire. Too many zeros. Too many zeros. I can't. So that's where it is. And I just reached a point, somebody said to me a while ago, don't even think about that anymore because it's counterproductive. It doesn't do any good.
So do you think that it's beyond the scope of our politics to rein it in? Have we lost that battle? Is that what you're saying?
I think what we need to do is focus on that which can actually be done in a practical way.
Which is what at this point?
Trying to pass some kind of legislation that will actually create jobs for what I call regular folks, people like me, people like, try to create some more jobs, try to, in some way, because they're never really going to tax the people in that category, relative to the money that they make. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen, and it's less likely to happen now than it was even 50 years ago. Interestingly enough, I've read that both under, I think Eisenhower and Nixon, which is such a strange irony, that the wealthiest portion of this country were actually taxed much higher than they are today.
Well, that was one of the really shocking things during the last election cycle was looking at Mitt Romney's finances as against his father's. Mm-hmm. His father, who paid 90% tax on his also magnificent, enormous wealth.
Right.
In a generation.
I think people like his father had a different vision, I think, of what capitalism actually is or was. I mean, and so they knew that it's like when you tithe yourself in a religious sense. They knew that a certain portion of that, it wasn't going to hurt them. They weren't going to miss that extra money. They were already fine for several lifetimes. So why not pay more? Make it be more relative and more relevant in terms of what you're giving back in taxes. Right. But we've long since, to tell you the truth, I'm sorry, but Obama's people are all of Wall Street.
Right.
They're all the Wall Street gang.
So is it as simple as this, that when you're making cars, you have to have a sense of place because cars are material, and so it just kind of keeps you rooted. So your corporation is still a corporation, the wealth is still magnificent, but you're kind of rooted in a place with a sense of being part of a society, whereas a generation later, once your wealth is based on financialization and capitalization and moving things around and buying and selling and packaging derivatives and all of this stuff, that there's no sense of place, there's no sense of community, there's no sense of being part of the fabric of the society.
Yeah. Well, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, if you look at the robber barons in the late 1800s, okay, and early 1900s, when you had the families, you had the Morgans and you had the Fricks, and you had Carnegie, and you had the Rockefellers, and you had families like that. But everything you say is absolutely right. These people, their wealth was oil money, railroads, mining in South America. I remember Nelson Rockefeller couldn't remember how much money they actually had from their mines in Chile or wherever the heck it was. So, yeah, I mean, it was very concrete. It was all very concrete. It was steel mills. It was this. It was that. So they were connected to place, and they were definitely connected to country as well. And they had a certain sense of, yeah, they were robber barons, and they had U.S. senators in their pockets until we finally decided it was better to elect senators rather than to have them appointed. Okay, that was not a real good idea. But nevertheless, but they still knew that they were Americans, and that's why so many of them eventually started to give back. And you had the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and Carnegie, and all these things that they did. Because, yeah, they were robber barons, but they were robber barons with a sense of, I'm here in a place, in a time, in a country, and I love this country, so I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to give something back. But you're absolutely right. I think the people who make millions of dollars doing hedge fund things and whatever, there's no reality to it whatsoever. All you're doing is going on a computer and trading and selling, but there's nothing real. You're not producing anything. You're not making anything better. You're just trading in a way that makes lots of money for you, but it's all very unreal. It's very unreal. So, and then of course, Mother Nature has a way of leveling all of that, right? Japan, and even parts of this country, the superstorms, the tsunamis, the earthquakes, and whatever. Mother Nature is just sort of thumbing her nose and saying, you know what, all you people are pathetic, because you can amass billions and billions of dollars. But if I decide to have a superstorm, which literally shuts down New York City, right? Shuts down the city. What an eerie feeling in the middle of the night that the only thing that connected Manhattan to the mainland was one tunnel that was open. Everything else was shut down because it was flooded. Everything. What a strange, eerie, bizarre feeling. And the devastation that storm. So with all of their money and all of their power and stuff, guess what? It could all come to an end like that. So that's another thing. So I think some of it is they're somewhat delusional in thinking that they'll really be spared if there's like a real catastrophe, an earthquake or something like that, because they're not. Everybody will go down. That's just the nature of life. And so I think they're deluding themselves a little bit with their power. But in terms of what they think and their detachment from the rest of people, absolutely. I mean, I think the robber barons had a sense, as you say, of time and place and who they were. These folks, I don't even think they know who the rest of the world is. They don't.
So you strike me as a kind of temperamentally optimistic person. Yeah. So what's your outlook? Like, what do you think we're headed for? Because you're also a realist, clearly.
Yeah, I'm a realist. I think that getting older right now, at this point, will actually make things a little bit easier for me if my health holds out, because then I'll be eligible for even more things. Like I'll be able to go on to Medicare in a year, and I'll have things like that taken care of. But I've decided that, just like I guess in certain countries where they think it's really cool to have somebody just go off and become, a spiritual being or something. I don't think I'll go off and do that, but there are just things that I know aren't going to happen in my lifetime, and whether I feel sad about those things or not, I figure that while I'm alive, I might as well do the things that I know that I can still do for as long as I can still do those things. And so I try to focus on that and focus on the fact that there's always the book I want to read, or the music I want to hear, or the spring is coming, or there's somebody down there who I know I'm going to meet, or all of that stuff. And those things keep me going. Those things keep me going. And that, plus the fact that I feel a certain obligation, because as hard as things were, I didn't suffer the way other people did. The people who lost their homes, the people who have nowhere to go, the people who have no support system. All of those folks are far worse off. And so I feel for them. So I try to give back in that sense too. When I can, I would do even more. But my dream of like, oh, I'm going to hit a certain age and then I'll be able to retire and just do volunteer work, I don't see that happening unless I win the lottery. I don't think it's going to happen.
Let me guess, you're not buying lottery tickets.
Occasionally I do. Yeah, occasionally I do. I do all the birthdays of everybody, and try that approach and whatever. But usually it doesn't work. But no, if that doesn't happen, then I think I'll be working for a good long time.
Yeah.
But I am optimistic, and I also think that some of that energy will have to be redirected, because there's a lot of work to be. I mean, I love the wonderful expression, tikkun olam, repair the world, and I do agree with that. I think that on some level, that's part of the sort of general scheme of things. That you shouldn't just take, you need to give back.
Right.
And I have seen people, like when I do volunteer work in this lunch program, I have seen people who have nothing and they have a hot meal, and that's a very big deal. And they also do very gentle things sometimes for each other, like if somebody is older or something, they'll say, oh, I'll help you with that, or I'll do it. It's a small gesture, but it's a large gesture. So even though they have so very little, they're still aware on some level that we're human beings on the planet, and that this is the way you behave towards another human being. You're civil to that person. You try to help somebody who is older or has difficulty walking or something. I'm very touched by that. When I see it, when I hear it, I say, oh, see, for all the people out there who are doing God knows what in terms of very bad behavior, but then I see something very gentle and very touching, and I go, I've seen people helping people on the subway or on buses, literally helping like somebody onto the bus. And it's a very moving thing to see that people are still aware of that in other people, total strangers. So it's very encouraging to me to see that. Keeps me an optimist.
Yeah. Well, it's been great to catch up. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel like we should have, or anything that you haven't said that you wish you had?
That's a good. Well, I think one of the good things, one of the really significant changes in the last few years has been the fact that I really don't feel isolated anymore. When everything first happened, I felt isolated for a lot of reasons, and part of it was just the fact that I was feeling really bad about myself, so it was harder to socialize. It was harder to go out there and do things. And now that I feel better about myself, I then can be more relaxed and natural and enjoy things more than I have in a while. And that's been a real pleasure. Like the other evening, a friend called me and said she'd gotten these real inexpensive tickets for this off-Broadway play, which was a lot of fun. It was in one of those warehouse theaters that seats like 30 people or something. And it was the kind of very spontaneous thing, an impulsive thing that I hadn't been able to do for a while. And it felt so good to be able to just say to somebody, yeah, let's go and do this. Let's go and do this. It sounds like fun. And just go out and enjoy myself. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
In 2009, you said you felt that, I think you were just talking about the city, but maybe you meant the country, had not really absorbed or reckoned with the scale of the disaster. You were talking about how there was actually no way to even see. We talked about the space available signs everywhere, and as being one of the single things that you could actually see around the city as a way of thinking about the scope of the crisis. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it was kind of invisible and very hard to see, like the scale and the scope and the level of widespread devastation that 2008 and 2009 were seeing. Do you feel that we've come to terms anymore with that in the years since? Do you think that as a city, as a society, as a culture, we understand the crisis any better now than we did 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
I don't know if we understand it better. I just think that in a way it's changed. We've changed and it's changed. And I think that in certain ways people, I think, are more hopeful. I think some of the leaders, not just the leaders on the federal level, but I think people after Hurricane Sandy, I think that all three of the governors came out looking very strong and very caring and whatever. And I think that was a very interesting thing. So it seems to be moving more to like local and statewide. People are feeling better. As terrible, and I'm not speaking for all those people who still are living in parts of New York or Connecticut or New Jersey that are still completely devastated. But I think because there's a sort of collective feeling, people came together to help. They had some place to put their energy. Those who weren't hurt as much reached out to people who were. People gave, millions of dollars to rescue efforts and so on. People from other parts of the country came in and did all this wonderful on-the-ground work. I mean, my heavens, the Baptist church from down south, they set up food tents and medical tents and so on. So that part was like very localized and that sort of a thing. And I think that that's what made it perhaps more bearable and more tolerable, because when things are that massive, anybody, it's just too much. It's too overwhelming. But if it's more localized and you see something happening in your neighborhood or your city or your state, that things are beginning to change, then you have that hope that things will turn around. But if you don't see that anywhere, if you don't see anything even going on in your own neighborhood or your own city, that's when it becomes really overwhelming. I think it's less so now because people see, even on a local level, that things are beginning to happen. Mm-hmm. And also people are not that isolated anymore because everybody's become aware of the unemployment figures or what's going on here, there, and everywhere. And so I think people are more hopeful. And I think people are beginning... Americans have this whole thing about, we can do this. There's a very pragmatic side to the majority of Americans. And eventually, once we get over the shock and the horror, we're like, okay, what can we do to go out and help somebody rebuild this house in Breezy Point? We love doing that. We love the nuts and bolts of feeding people and helping them build a house and, cleaning out the debris and doing that, because that's concrete. That's something that you can kind of wrap yourself around. It's not an abstract like, well, if we keep going this way in a few years, our GDP will be less of this and more of that. And everybody goes, yeah, well, that's boring and a drag anyway. Other than economists who really understand it, nobody else does. But if you go with a group or charity, or you give your money to Habitat for Humanity and you see them building houses in some part of Queens that's been totally devastated, then you have a sense of, oh, okay, this is something I can wrap around my mind around. Mm-hmm. It's better now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.